We have to be quiet. I'm not sure if anyone's in the house. Nat, I really don't think we should be doing this. Don't have any doubts now. Come on, we're almost there. I can see his headstone from here. He is Bunsville's most celebrated author. He gave us the troubled character of Virginia Mayflower. Jerry Hart is so much more than his literacy contributions. He grew to be very lonely in that house. I don't even really know what happened between the two of them. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. My name is Danielle Willows. Last night we brought you a very tragic story about the 3 teenage girls who disturbed the final resting place of Jerry Hart. You know his works, you've read his books, but who is the writer behind one of Bunsville's most famous literacy contributions? And what is his story of being the most reclusive yet infamous writer of Bunsville? In tonight's program, we have exclusive interviews with Hart's sister and the quote-unquote biographer of Jerry Hart. Thank you, Clementine Fitzgerald and Eva Gerald, for joining me. Happy to be here, Daniela. Thank you very much indeed, Danielle. So, let me start with you, Clementine. What was it like growing up with a legend? Well, his real name was Jeremy Fitzgerald, but we did call him Jerry for short. The four of us at the time, all lived on a beautiful acreage just looking over Bunsville, which was called Battle Ranch. I don't have a clue why it was called that, but it always had the smell of like citrusy, kind of sandalwoody smell. I do have this cool memory of Jerry and I picking peaches from our neighbour's tree, but I think that was just before my sister's death. Margaret Fitzgerald, the oldest of the 4 children, died of influenza in 1954. Thank you. I was only 9, and I think Jerry was, I'll say about 7 or 8. But as Margaret was so ill, she really couldn't do anything and just lie in bed all day. And she would read Jerry stories, and she gave him encouragement. And it just pains me that I couldn't have been interested, and I could have given him even more encouragement. But I believe with Margaret's death, this was his first introduction to death, which kind of allures to the subject of his books. And shortly after that, it was when the Fitzgerald family moved to your second home on 10th Avenue. That's right, our father, George, believed that all of us could use a fresh start. So we moved into this beautiful, small, yellow brick cottage on, I think it was 10th Avenue. But as soon as Catherine, my older sister, she turned 18 shortly after, and she was always reminded by our mother to try and find a husband, because she had boxes, and I mean boxes, of sewing patterns and knitting patterns of children's clothes. Isa had 4 daughters and 1 son to her second cousin, George, but her mother, Irene, drilled into her the importance of keeping in the family and the rather crude term of the abundance of Fitzgeralds. Would you say during this time he was showing evidence of becoming a writer? That's right. Well, I think Jerry could write a story as soon as he picked up a pen. I remember there was once where it was just after, at least a year after we had moved into the yellow cottage, and there was this little injured sparrow on his windowsill, and he wrote this entire 4-page story of its life and, you know, its journey through the acreage of Battle Ranch, and how it died on its windowsill. He was very talented at a very early age. And to add on from that, Clementine, writing for Gerald was his passion, his refuge when he couldn't console any sisters, and his escape, both from their home on the Battle Ranch and also on 10th Avenue. Jerry Hart is considered one of Bunsville's most significant cultural exports. As he is your brother, Clementine, do you believe in this statement? Well, he was certainly talked about during Fitzgerald's family reunions, but not in a good way. He's not seen in the same eyes as he's seen in the world. He is a runaway, essentially. He was betrothed to my father's second cousin's daughter, Melinda. They'd been married. They've been set to marry since both of them were born. I think they were both born in the same year. But as Jerry was learning to write, Melinda was learning how to be a good wife to him down the track. Do you have anything to add, Eva? Catherine Fitzgerald, the second daughter of George and Isa, went to college swiftly after they moved to 10th Avenue, and under the very smothering advice of her mother, she was encouraged to attend every social event in order to find a husband, if she wasn't already engaged to a second cousin or something. It was very obvious in my research that once the children were born, very based on their gender, was the fact that their future was already set out for them. You're very well researched. Thank you. Jerry never went down that particular route. I'll let Clementine talk about that topic. Oh yes, I followed the track that my mother had set out for me to go down. I married Melinda's brother, David, and we've had 3 beautiful children together. But when I was preparing for my wedding in 1966, Jerry had moved away to Bunsville College, and he was very much taken. Taken? Jerry had no interest in studying Shakespeare. I remember he got confused when he tried to read Romeo and Juliet, but he, without a doubt, despite anything, he would attend the Shakespeare classes held by this one professor named Emmanuel Hart. Jerry Hart knew how to write a story. It seemed very natural for him to come up with an idea and write it in a very immersive and cohesive story at a very young age. Personally, I didn't think he needed to take writing lessons. However, from that first class at Bunsville College, under, I believe it was Shakespeare Studies, it was scheduled in the fall of 1966, which was when Jerry Hart, or Jeremy Fitzgerald, and Emmanuel Hart would meet. Would you say that Emmanuel Hart was Jerry's first homosexual relationship? Oh no, but I'm pretty sure it was his last. Although come to think of it, I can probably think of his first. Shortly after we moved into central Bunsville, I got my first boyfriend, Lucas Knight. He was absolutely gorgeous. He had dark hair, he was much taller than the rest of the boys, cute little glasses, and yeah, I liked him because he was tall, and turns out that was the same reason why Jerry liked him too. Lucas Knight, along with the other Fitzgerald children, attended the Bunsville High from early to mid-1960s. Courting was a big game in Bunsville High, and I believe the first rule was for the boy to give a photo of himself to one of the girls. Lucas had done this with Clementine. Well, the photo that I had of Lucas is probably buried in the attic somewhere, but there was something very peculiar about that photo. I had it taped to my mirror, and every single time that Jerry came into my room, he would look at it. I didn't think twice, because, you know, whatever. But he would point out how, like, Lucas must have gone to a seedy photo studio to get it done, because he must have moved or something, because there's, like, the shape of his head behind him. And Jerry would always joke about how there was, like, a ghost standing behind him, which I always thought was really creepy. But that might have been an inkling to why or how my brother wrote ghost, or at least horror stories. Did Jerry ever send any photos to any girls at Bunsville High? Not that I know of. With our two sisters gone, and like, I wasn't the most popular girl, but I knew that he was on his own a lot. He kept himself to himself. Jerry Hart was lonely, and in his early diaries he wrote about this character that got everything that he wished so desperately to get in life. And through my research I've found that this is the very start of the creation of the Virginia Mayflower character. And what's peculiar about this is that this diary was written between 1958 and 1959, a good 10 years before anything of his gets published. And it was under the advice of Emmanuel Hart that Jerry got his papers published. That's right, it wasn't even a year that Jerry was in Bunsville College, and Emmanuel saw something in Jerry that was very rare. He didn't really have anyone who was there for him between the ages of 8 and 18. Like, Margaret was there, and it breaks my heart that I couldn't have replaced her in terms of encouragement for Jerry. But when he met Emmanuel at the age, I think he was 19, Emmanuel gave him the encouragement that I wish with all my heart that I could have given him. There are no diaries of Jerry Hart that me and my team could find of his time at Bunsville College, but I can only imagine how intense the relationship was between Jerry Hart, Jeremy Fitzgerald, and Emmanuel Hart. But do you believe that their relationship was so intense that Jerry took Emmanuel's surname? Jerry Hart wasn't a man of his time. He wrote very dark stories where a lot of children book writers were coming out of Bunsville's literacy groups. He was a very reclusive person. He was a naturally shy person, when Bunsville was one of those towns that if a woman forgot her gloves to church, it was the height of gossip for the next week. And also, he was a homosexual when it was illegal. On the other hand, Emmanuel Hart was very much married for the previous 10 years to his childhood sweetheart, yet that didn't stop their relationship flourishing. I don't even want to talk about or even think about the sex life of my brother, but I think he found solace and safety in his relationship with Emmanuel. I don't even really know what happened between the two of them, but it was the one stable relationship that he had in his life, which was why it was so hard for him when Emmanuel was called into Vietnam in, I think, the summer of '67. If we break down the timeline, between 1966 and 1967, Emmanuel met Jerry in the fall of 1966. Presuming their relationship started immediately, they would be together across the next 9 months. During that time, 9 papers were written by Jerry under his real name, Jeremy Fitzgerald, and it was published in the Bunsville Chronicle, which was a student-run paper established within Bunsville College. And Emmanuel was called up for service to Vietnam in late 1967. 4 days before the beginning of 1968, Emmanuel was killed in Vietnam, leaving both his wife and Jeremy heartbroken. How very awful. Well, I just given birth to my eldest, Ruby, and he visited me and my family one weekend, and I have honestly have never seen him so skinny. Like, it was, you could see like the bones of his shoulders when he walked into my living room. I've never seen him with how thin his hair was and how gaunt his face was. I don't think I'll ever erase that memory from my mind. With the death of his sister at the age of 8 and the death of his lover at age 20, this was the first and second time he would meet death, and the third time he met death was when he was in a car accident just after graduating college. Oh no, not another one. According to witnesses of the event, Jerry was not drunk or ill of mind. It was a very clear and swift aim into a lamppost on 64th and Damien Street. However, I don't think it was an accident that Emmanuel's widow lived in the house facing that lamppost. I don't know who he blamed. I don't know if he blamed anyone, but my brother, he couldn't walk for the next 6 months. Out of all his rage, he made himself paralyzed for 6 months afterwards, and it's a bloody miracle that he could walk again. So as we're now reaching into 1969, it turns out that him getting into a car accident turned out to be a good thing. Morbidly, yes, I guess. I'm guessing he reflected a lot, he thought a lot when he was in hospital. When he was in college, he wrote for Emmanuel, I think. But with his lover gone, he felt that he couldn't write anymore without Emmanuel's reassurance. When I did visit him in hospital, he could barely talk. He was so depressed they didn't even have the energy to talk. But about a month later, he was banging away at his typewriter. I visited him twice in the span of a month, and something happened between that time, and he was going at the typewriter. I think it was June 1969. I don't know what happened, but it was a good thing. On that hospital bed, Jerry wrote the first draft for the first Virginia Mayflower book. And just like that, a legend is born. Out of a series of terrible events, one good and very life-saving event happened. It is rumored that Jerry kept the pamphlet of Emmanuel's funeral on his bedside at all times, and some of the researchers in my team may think that he may have looked at that pamphlet and taken Emmanuel's surname. Jerry Hart's contribution to the literacy world is of equal to Claude Rodéo's to the art world. It is undeniable that Virginia Mayflower's books was influenced by the events of Jerry's life. Oh, without a doubt. But if we are looking at the events of Jerry's life, there was one very crucial event that cemented him as the horror writer that he became, and this event was recorded by the man himself. In my own intense research about Jerry Hart, I was able to track down a diary that he kept, and it was found, well, I found it in the last residence of Jerry Hart. The infamous Thornby house has an abundance of historical artifacts from the Thornbys and their other residents, but inside of Jerry's final journal, it was dated from 1970 to 1971, and he mentioned something rather odd. Let me guess, a ghost. How did you know? Are you serious? Lucky guess? No, I'm serious. Jerry recorded about the time that he was given a tour of the Thornby house. I think it was about at least a week before he purchased it, and he was greeted by 3 spirits. This occurrence only fueled his interest into the occult and ignited the other 3 books about Virginia Mayflower, and they were to become darker than their predecessor. However, this dark projection into the literacy world would come at a cost. He grew to be very lonely in that house. He was all alone, I believe, for the final year of his life. I regret with all my heart that I couldn't have visited him one weekend or another. Yet those years produced his legacy. He wrote 4 books: The Tragedy of Virginia Mayflower, The Loneliness of Virginia Mayflower, The Rise of Virginia Mayflower, and The World of Virginia Mayflower. It's a pity he didn't take many interviews. Yes, Jerry was very particular about doing interviews, and I believe you, Danielle, were the one of very 3 newspapers or news reporters that he liked getting interviews by. Well, I was very lucky to interview him twice. I don't mean to upset you, Clementine, but there was footage that we still have of the final interview of Jerry Hart, and there's one question that I asked him that is a very eerie prophecy. Could we roll it, please? And thank you so much, Mr. Hart, for joining me on this wonderful interview. Would you mind if I asked you one quick final question? Oh, please, of course, it's been fun. Would our audience be able to have a taste of the 5th and final book about Virginia Mayflower? As long as there's blood in my veins, I'm going to keep that draft close to my chest. I'll go to my grave before saying anything about what's going to happen in the legacy of Virginia Mayflower. I never got a chance to say goodbye. That is very eerie to watch. I don't mean to upset you, Clementine, but it wasn't even 2 years Jerry was living at the Thornby house that he had died in front of his typewriter of alcohol poisoning in the main living room of the house. Yes, January 4th, 1972 was a dark day for Bunsville. I suppose he had done what he needed to do on Earth, and it was time for him to be with Margaret and Emmanuel. I think it was just time for him to go. In the months after Jerry's death, the lease of the Thornby house would go into the hands of the Bunsville Historical Society. In the following months after that, it was converted into the Bunsville Museum that would showcase the lifestyle elements of the Thornby house, the diary of Justine Cleveland, the typewriter in which Jerry used to write the Virginia Mayflower books, and the small homage to the deaths of the 3 women who died in its walls: Paula Younghusband, Helena Campbell, and Lucy Howard. Learning about the history of the Thornby house and knowing what happened to my brother, it seems that the house can only take one soul at a time for a very limited time. There is so much history in that house, spanning 50 plus years. And I wouldn't be surprised if the house had a soul of its own. I just hope that my brother feels safe, encouraged, and finds solace in heaven. You brought just a butter knife? Do you think that's going to dig him up? Well, first of all, it's a steak knife, and second of all, I can't really go on the train with a 2-meter axe or at least freaking shovel. Now can I? Yeah, you wouldn't want people knowing that we're digging up graves or something, are we? Well, I'm sorry for stating what we're actually doing. Look, are we going to do this or not? Yes, we are. Millie, please go ahead. You're doing great, Mill. I can see the top of the coffin already. What on earth are you 3 doing? Leave this property now or I'm calling the police. Please call Natasha Roberts to the stand, please. So, Natasha Roberts, you are Natasha Roberts, are you not? No, I am. Just being sure. Could you tell me where you were, Miss Roberts, on the 4th day of October 1971? I was with my friends. I asked where you were. I was on the Thornby estate. Could you be a little bit more specific? Objection. My client is obviously very nervous in front of all these people. Can she be asked a little less intimidating questions, please? That's a good suggestion. Bertha, ease up, please. Certainly, Your Honour. Miss Roberts, could you please enlighten the court, when did your quote-unquote interest of Jerry Hart begin? I got it from a thrift store, I think, a good year ago. And what was the name of that novella? The Tragedy of Virginia Mayflower. Did you know of Jerry Hart's work before finding his first book in the thrift store? I've never heard of him. I find that hard to believe, as Jerry Hart is the most famous author out of Bunsville. I'm sorry, I'm not that kept up with local history. It appears so. You mentioned that you bought Jerry Hart's book a good year ago. When exactly did you buy his book? I can't be sure. You can't be sure? You can't be sure that you don't know when you bought his book. Objection? Irrelevance to case. I object to Enid's objection. This has everything to do with the case. Sustained. Proceed, Bertha. Thank you, Your Honour. As you put it, Miss Roberts, it's been a good year since you found Mr. Hart's book in the thrift store. It has also been a good year in which the events that took place leading up to your attempted grave robbing of Jerry Hart's grave, and those such events would be if you would care to enlighten the court, Miss Roberts. I don't know what you mean. Oh, really? No further questions, my lord. Calling Millie Edwards to the stand.
Calling Millie Edwards. Calling Millie Edwards.
Millie Edwards, were you the one of two friends that joined Natasha on the Thornby estate on the 4th day of October 1971? Yes, I was. Me and Hannah were with her. Could you enlighten the court as to what you were doing on the Thornby estate? The three of us planned to dig up Jerry Hart's grave in order to find out what happened in his 5th and final book. Silence in court, please. That's a very advantageous plan. Can I ask you where you got such a notion to carry out this plan? Hannah and I never watched the interview. Nat was the one who watched Jerry Hart's final interview, and apparently he mentioned something about, like, going to his grave, with the plot of the final book. So are you saying that it was Natasha's idea to carry out this plan? To find out the story of the 5th and final plot of Jerry Hart's book, is that what you're saying? Yes. Hannah and I told her that it was illegal to bring up someone once they've been buried, but Natasha wanted to do it anyway. How dare you backstab me? You are just to be blamed. I will not have my courtroom ruled by a child. Bertha, please continue. Thank you, my lord. So Millie, as you claimed that Natasha had read the book, the first of the three of you to read Hart's book and viewed the final interview of Jerry Hart, do you agree that she is to be blamed for this entire situation? Hannah and I have read all of Hart's work and were just as interested in what would happen in the 5th book as Natasha was. But do you agree that if Natasha had not bought the book from the thrift store a good year ago, all of this would not have happened? Objection, my lord. Now what? My client wishes to address the court. My lord, I am in the middle of interviewing Millie. My lord, she says it's very urgent and it may bring this situation to a very swift end. Natasha Roberts, please rise. Thank you, Your Honour. Okay. This court proceedings have been about the robbing of Jerry Hart's grave. I may have persuaded my friends to read the Jerry Hart book and help me find out what would happen in the 5th and final book. But I never touched the grave. This court case may have been about the disturbance of Jerry Hart, but Millie was the one, was the one who actually dug him up. That's right. She used her father's steak knife to dig up the dirt. Well, you were the one who actually dug up Jerry Hart's grave. And may I ask you, Millie, why were you the one who dug up the grave of Jerry Hart instead of you, Natasha? Because Natasha was getting her stupid nails done and she didn't want to mess them up before prom. So she told me to do it. So you were the one who dug up, not Natasha. You, Millie, were the one who attempted to dig up Jerry Hart's coffin. Yes. I did. You may return to your seat, Millie. We will resume court proceedings when the jury has given their decision. Thank you. All rise. Millie Edwards, Hannah Carroll, Natasha Roberts. You are Bunsville citizens, age 16 respectively. The jury has confirmed to me that Hannah and Natasha are not to be charged today. Upon recent evidence, and only upon recent evidence before me, it has been decided that Millie Edwards, and only Millie Edwards, will be sentenced today. Millie, please remain standing. Millie Edwards, you are to be punished only for the particular wrongdoing you have committed at the attempted grave robbing of final resting place of renowned author Jerry Hart. Miss Edwards, I want to acknowledge that in sentencing you today, I do so on the basis that you are a fine member of the Bunsville community, a straight-A student at Bunsville High, and you are the centre position at the Bunsville Babes netball team. Yet you are entitled to the balance and equal hand of justice. Jerry Hart was also a fine member of the community. He put Bunsville on the map in terms of literacy excellence, yet you, Millie Edwards, have seemed to be a very bright student, disturbed his peace. Miss Edwards, you seem to have a bright future, both in terms of academia and athleticism. Yet across the previous 12 months, you are enthralled by the work of Jerry Hart. The jury has concluded that Millie Edwards willfully and dispassionately disturbed the eternal sleep of such a fine man, an icon of his time. Millie Edwards, I am persuaded that the combination of Jerry Hart's literacy significance and your lack of care of local history and life and death, if you were 5 years older, the jury and I were imposed a life sentence. However, that is not appropriate in this case. Millie, would you please sit down? Millie Edwards, I sentence you 11 years in prison in accordance to the Bunsville Law Regulation 53A 217. You did willfully interfere with the burial ground and in turn commit criminal mischief and conspiracy. I set a non-parole period of 5 years and 11 months. That means you will become eligible to apply for parole after serving this non-parole period. Your release on parole will be a matter for the parole board. The both of you should have been charged too. This is all your fault, Natasha. Get off me. I shouldn't have been penalised for this. It's not my fault. It's all your fault, Natasha. It's all of yours, both you and Hannah. It's both of your faults. I have nothing to do with this. Let go of me, please.